Property. Now that I got your attention. Hi, I'm APB, and when I'm not giving you dubious advice on the Australian real estate market, I'm telling you how to make a recession-busting homebrew for as little as $8 a case. Now, if I was going to tell you it's cheap and easy, then I'd be trying to sell you something. Man's search for cheap beer has been the holy grail for centuries. The reality is, if it was easy, every man and his dog would be doing it. The trick is there are some great tips to help make the whole process just a little bit easier. So just because successive Australian governments have constantly interfered and overstimulated the housing market, taking it from a basic place to live to the crack-addicted, debt-craving investment monster that it's become, that doesn't mean you have to go without a decent cold beer if you end up getting booted from your job as a result.
Let the booting begin!
Booting?
No, it's just a little kick in the bum.
What kind of a sick country would kick someone with a giant boot?
Mr. Sense and Shush. Disparaging the boot is a bootable offense. It's one of their proudest traditions.
If you're like me and employed in the slower speed of the economy, when the market finally ODs and prices crash, you can relax knowing you still have enough money to provide for one of the most basic of human entitlements. But before I go any further, please be aware brewing your own beer has certain hazards, so follow all the safety instructions and exercise due care. Good question. Well, each brew gives you 23 litres of beer, so regardless of how you split it up, it's practically 2 cases or 2 slabs, whichever you want to call it. If you go for the plain sugar method I describe in this video, your consumables are pretty much $13 for the kit and $3 for the sugar, which comes out to about $8 for the case. If you go the deluxe method, you pay the same amount for the kit, but you pay more for the brewing sugar and the carbonation drops. Brewing sugar gives the beer a lighter taste, as this type of sugar is more easily converted to alcohol by the yeast during primary fermentation. If you use normal sugar like raw sugar, then the beer tends to taste a bit more heavy like an ale. Carbonation drops are a quick and easy way to add the sugar for secondary fermentation at the point of bottling, where the beer gets its fizz. If you haven't already done so, you have to invest in the startup materials for a brew. The basic materials you could get away with doing a decent brew include a beer keg and tap, an airlock, bottle caps, a hand bottle capper, a brass nozzle for cleaning bottles, and 24 long necks. I always prefer long necks because for 24 long necks your filling and capping time is half that of 48 stubbies. You can buy all these items new, which would cost around $100, otherwise I'm sure you could get them on eBay for a total as little as $50. You also need access to these common household items. Of course, there's always a catch, that other half of the equation, good old time and effort. Typically I find the labour involved in a home brew is divided evenly between washing the bottles, mixing the brew, and bottling the beers. But the good news is there are some pretty tidy shortcuts, and you can cut down the time it takes to brew dramatically. As this video is pitched as a bit of an introduction, every home brewer has their own way of doing things, in which case, for nothing else, this video is to share homebrew methods and similarly welcome any thoughts and good ideas in the comments. Buying new bottles costs money. Sterilising old bottles takes time, but we still need clean bottles to drink from. Sterilisation powder requires a process of rinsing, sterilising, rinsing, drying. For this reason, it can be the most labour-intensive step, and the effort alone can deter many punters. So if you're washing bottles for the first time, one option is to use the following diluted bleach mixture. Fill the bottles halfway with the diluted bleach and leave them sit overnight to kill anything living and remove dirt from the bottom of the bottles. Take due care in draining the bleach and rinsing the bottles with water. A good way to store bottles is by stacking them upside down in a milk crate to avoid any water or dust collecting in the bottom of the bottles. The method I prefer requires access to a garden hose and milk crates. Tilt the top milk crate to help drain the bottles. Using a brass pressure nozzle on a garden hose, the jet of water is just as effective at pressure cleaning the bottles. Rotate the nozzle in order to clean the corners at the base of the bottle. It's a good idea to wear a gardening glove on the hand holding the bottle, as the water jet can sting after a while. You can also get a pressure nozzle attachment that screws straight onto a garden tap, which does the same thing, which would suit better if you lived in a unit. You get a little wet in the process, so it's better if you can clean all the bottles in one go, but I find this method is much quicker than soaking bottles in bleach overnight and rinsing and drying them the next day. Again, cleaning the bottles in this way is only a once-off. In reality, once the bottles are initially cleaned, all they require is a quick rinse in the kitchen sink before being drained and stored for reuse. The principle of putting down a home brew is no different from mixing a jug of cordial. You add the malt concentrate and then you add water to make up the brew to 23 litres. The resulting mix of concentrate and water is called the wort. Of course, the difference between homebrew and cordial is that you're making the homebrew alcoholic. This is achieved by adding yeast and sugar to the wort at a temperature of between 20 and 27 degrees. 1 kilogram of sugar yields 5% alcohol. Note that 2 kilograms of sugar doesn't produce 10% alcohol, as the yeast can only digest a certain amount of sugar, so 1 kilogram is pretty much the optimum amount. Boil a jug of water and scrape out any remaining concentrate from the tin. Rinse the concentrate remaining in the tin using some boiled water and add this to the keg. Once the wort is mixed, we want the temperature to be somewhere between 20 and 27 degrees, so depending on whether it's summer or winter, you normally have to add 1 or 2 litres of boiling water. Add the 1 kilogram of sugar at this point and stir into the concentrate using a sterilised stirrer. It's best to close the lid at this point. As soon as you pour in the concentrate, you want to try and minimise infection and only use a clean stirrer. The more the keg is exposed to the air at this point, the more chance there is of infection, which can result in that unclean, home brewy taste. If you can, take the keg out to the garden hose. Stick the hose onto the tap of the keg and open the tap. Gently turn the garden hose on to a gentle flow until water eventually reaches the 23 litre mark. Give the wort a stir and check the temperature is in the range of 20 to 27 degrees. At this point, sprinkle the yeast onto the top of the mixture and dab half the yeast into the mix using a spoon. The yeast is added for fermentation. There are 2 byproducts of yeast eating sugar, one of which is alcohol, the one we want, and the other is carbon dioxide, which is produced over the period of fermentation and requires an airlock, which acts to only let carbon dioxide out and not any air into the keg, which would contaminate the brew. Do the lid back up tightly and take the keg inside to a place where it can sit to ferment over the next week. The best place is a well-insulated area, generally a downstairs area where the temperature is cool and most constant. If this also happens to be a place where you can bottle the brew, like a garage, then all the better. The brew will continue to ferment for about 6 days, after which, if you have a hydrometer, you can check if the brew is ready for bottling by measuring the remaining sugar level or specific gravity. Alternatively, if it's not been too cold and the brew has been consistently bubbling during the previous week, then I find it's okay to just wait 1 day after I first notice the brew has stopped bubbling before bottling. You don't want to bottle too early as there is still too much sugar in the wort and you can end up with bottles exploding. Again, this shouldn't happen if you only use 1 kilo of sugar, the brew has been bubbling consistently over the previous week, and you wait at least 1 day after it stopped bubbling before you bottle.
Kaboom, blam! Oh, excuse me again, dear.
Homer, there's no point in pretending you're making those noises. Your homemade liquor is exploding again.
What, dear? Kablamo!
When you're ready to bottle, take out the airlock and set up the keg in a way you can decant into bottles easily enough. Again, all you need is milk crates and a couple of Besser blocks are a good way to hold the bottle while it's filling. Carbonation drops are the quickest, most convenient method for adding sugar at the point of bottling, which is a secondary fermentation that gives the beer its fizz. Following the directions on the pack, add 1 carbonation drop per 375ml stubby or 2 per long neck. However, to use the plain sugar method I mentioned at the start instead of the carbonation drops, decant 1 litre of wort from the keg and thoroughly mix in no more than 230 grams of sugar. It's better to use caster sugar as this dissolves much quicker than table sugar. Now, using a 30ml automatic shot pourer, available for about $3 from bottle shops, give each long neck 1 30ml shot of the sugar solution, rotating the bottle 180 degrees each time to keep the solution well mixed. At this concentration, each pour equates to 2 carbonation drops. If you're using stubbies, then dilute the same amount of sugar with 2 litres of wort, in which case each 30ml shot would equate to 1 carbonation drop. While you can buy fancy bottle capping equipment, if you're just getting started, using a hand capper and a hammer with the bottle sitting on a wooden surface works just as well. Be sure to use a tough leather garden glove, strong enough to protect your hand should one of the bottles break. It's also handy to use a permanent marker to initial the name of the brew, whether it be lager, dark ale, or whatever you want to call it.
We have them in America. They're called bullfrogs.
What? That's an odd name. I'd have called them chazwazzers.
Again, milk crates are stacked and moved easily, which is particularly handy if you live in a unit. Once you've finished bottling, it always pays to rinse the keg immediately after use, before any remnants of the brew has a chance to dry and cake onto the plastic. It's also important to use a soft cloth to clean the inside of the keg and not a metal scourer, to avoid any small scratches to the inside of the plastic where bacteria might grow. If you don't rinse the keg straight after and you find you have to wash the keg just before using it again, wash the keg out with water and mix up the same concentration of bleach in water, preferably using boiling water in the keg. You can also sterilize things like your tap, airlock, stirring spoon by putting these things into the bleach in the keg. Screw on the lid tight and insert a plug or a rubber stopper in the hole of the lid. Turn the keg upside down and let it sit overnight, preferably in a sink or a bath just in case it leaks. If you want to remove the beer bottle labels, place a crate of full bottles in a laundry tub full of water and let them soak overnight. Using a metal object like a paint stripper, shave off the labels and use a metal scourer to remove any adhesive residue on the bottles. It's easier to see into bottles without their labels, which means less cleaning in the future. Instead of going through the bleaching procedure each time, bottles can simply be rinsed and drained at the sink, ready for reuse. Unfortunately, winter can prove a little too cold for home brewing. During the early part of the morning and late at night, ambient temperatures can mean the brew drops below the ideal temperature range of 20 to 27 degrees, as shown in orange on this diagram, and the brew can stop fermenting during these times, shown in blue at the bottom of the diagram. One option is to insulate the brew using a temperature-controlled hot box or an old bar fridge. I go for the heat pad option with temperature sensor that dips into the keg through the airlock. Typically a heat pad and thermostat setup can set you back about $150. But by using a heater controlled by thermostat, the brew temperature remains relatively constant above 20 degrees and there's less lag time as the yeast don't go to sleep overnight. Even if you get a particularly cold day, the brew keeps fermenting where it may otherwise stop. But having the brew ferment continuously instead of stopping and starting, total brew time is both shortened and more consistent. Shorter brew times mean less exposure to infection and ultimately a better tasting beer. More consistent brew times makes it easier to plan your days for bottling. A note on the Cooper's kits. For the amount of time you outlay to do a brew, it's worth doing it right and you can't substitute on your base ingredients. With kits like Canadian Blonde, Mexican Cerveza and European Lager, the Cooper's International Series match the yeast to the malt for you and are fantastic value as a kit. The Cooper's instructions focus on alternative methods and materials to achieving a good brew, not on trying to push more of their products onto you. I've consistently found this motivation is reflected by the quality of their kits. Thanks Cubas for such a top product and many cheap beers. So here's your free plug. You can check out more at diybeer.com.au. Many Australians have long been frustrated about the ridiculous amount of mortgage debt they've had to take on just to have their own place to live. But concerns have consistently been met by governments with a casual ignorance towards affordability and the inherent problems of a debt-laden middle class.
Oh, that's it. I'm gonna report this to me Member of Parliament. Hey, Gus! I got something to report to you.
That's a bloody outrage, it is. I want to take this all the way to the Prime Minister. Hey, Mr. Prime Minister! Andy!
Aye, mate. What's the good word?
Now their casual ignorance is threatening your ability to buy decent beer.
The Reserve Bank has struck a balance between global uncertainty on the one hand and Australia's strong economic fundamentals on the other. Australia's strong economic fundamentals on the other.
Oh, out of control. We're out of control.
Steve, you were scoffing at the idea that the fundamentals are sound.
Every time people say fundamentals are sound, you ask them, what do you mean by fundamentals? They will never answer the level of private debt.
But balance is in the eye of the beholder.
What we fear now is that we will see even tougher times and potentially job loss.
Did you know that during the Great Depression in Australia, there were books that showed how to make household furniture out of the wood from old kerosene crates? Soon enough, it may be time for Australians to turn on the improvisation again, and once again the humble crate will take on a whole new meaning.
We've got a level of private debt that's not only worse than we've ever had in history, but twice as bad as we got during the Great Depression. You call that one of your fundamentals, and this system is really fragile.
The clear message from the Reserve Bank is that the economy is fragile.
The reality is households are carrying 7 times as much debt per income as they were carrying back in 1990, and that's when you put on the fact that interest rates are half what they were then, the burden's 3.5 times as bad as at the depth of the 1990s recession. And that's why people are cutting back on spending. Flowers have gone down, alcohol's gone up. I think it's a worse sign when flowers go down than when alcohol does.
That's sad.
It is
sad. I think that's sad.
Congratulations, Springfield. We wish you the very best.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.